first book I published in 2013 is Christianity and the Veneration of Ancestors. And the subtitle is Should a Christian Consult the Dead? And so I hope that the answer is clear here. Sometimes it's not always clear. And so I've debated press, I've debated pastors, leaders, been on radio, sandwiched between leaders and pastors and people who believe that Christians should consult the dead, and people who believe that if we can read the book of Paul, and Paul being dead, we are consulting the dead. And so I've debated all kinds of amazing people who can think, who are brilliant thinkers, who can actually find a way of infusing their beliefs into Scripture. People who excel in proof texts. People who excel in taking the Bible out of context to fit and to come in the Bible with a confirmation bias, to come to read into the Bible what they believe the Bible ought to be saying. And so this is the kind of mixture we have in various parts of the world, but especially here in the African continent. So dealing with this, it's in the ministry, it's in churches, it's in communities, it's in schools, it's everywhere. My next book that follows that is Freed by God, but Imprisoned by Culture. And so that's what mainly I want to focus on, and how culture imprisons us so much. All of us sitting here are prisoners of culture. And culture, I define it, the basic definition of culture I have, besides the fact that the English dictionary tells that culture is a way of life. And I ask that way of life according to who? In other words, who comes up with that way of life as your culture? Culture started by a few, but followed by many. Culture, I define it as nothing else but you and I being governed by dead people. So whatever culture you follow, it is you submitting yourself to be governed by dead people. We are born into culture, we're not born with culture. We are born free of culture. Every person comes into the world as a clean slate. Nothing written on it. The canvas is clean until some other person writes on the canvas. And in South Africa, there's this thing of racial labels, demographic boxes. So you've got to tick a box. What's your box? I'm black, I'm colored, I'm white, and certain things. And so I've traveled, as I said, in many parts of South Africa. I have not met a white person. I haven't met a black person. I've met pink people. So the color of white doesn't exist for a human being. So it must be referring to something else. So whiteness cannot really be a definition of a person's skin color, but it must be defining something else. In the Bible, very interesting enough, in Genesis 1:26, let's make man our image. It never said let's make a black man or white man. Just said let's make man our image. So God doesn't define a person as black and white. So black and white are social political terms. They're man-made terms to serve a political purpose. God says, let's make man in our image. And a product ought to be defined by the one who makes it, not by the one who discovers it. So the God who made the product never defined the product as black and white. And so the person who makes the product has a right to define what is making. And so people define us in the way they choose to define us, because if I primarily define myself as black, that means that I have to define somebody of an ethnic group primarily as white, as the other rather than as the brother. So the way I see myself primarily determines how I see somebody else as primarily. So it's very important to understand that you may choose the label, but that label you choose for yourself also supposes that you have to look at me in some way that contrasts that label. So I'm primarily to you the color of my skin. If you are primarily the color of your skin, I ought to be the same. So I'm the other rather than the brother. As you would know, brothers don't have to share anything in terms of beliefs and ideas to be brothers. They don't have to agree on their political views. They don't have to share. They don't have to support the same soccer team or rugby team. The other brother may vote for the Lions, or support the Lions, my brother support the Sharks, the rugby teams. But they may different. They may vote for DA or ANC or EFF. I'm not. So I'm just saying. Maybe your brother. He might be crazy. He might be eccentric. He might be unusual, but it's your brother. Your brother because you share the same father. That's the only reason that brotherhood is predicated on, the fact that we have shared the same father. And so God says in Matthew 9:6, our Father who art in heaven, that's a prayer. He taught us, our Father. So if it's our Father, that means we are brothers. If we're not brothers, then we don't have the same Father. If we have the same Father, then we have no choice but to accept the fact that, as Martin Luther says, we either live together as brothers or die as fools. So we share the same Father. And therefore, as Christians, now, for Christians, you think this should be obvious. Like Obama said when he was here, former president of America, he says, I'm surprised that at this time I ought to repeat the fact that human beings are made, they have value. I'm surprised that I ought to state the obvious, that every human being has intrinsic value within it. But I'm amazed whenever I travel that I have to state the obvious among Christians. I'm amazed at how the obvious gets to be so obscured. How the major is minor and how the minor is major. How the insignificant issues are made significant and the significant issue is made insignificant. You know, how we absolutize the subjective issues and we make the thing that is absolute, we make it subjective and we devalue it. And that thing is a human being who's made in God's image. And that human being comes on earth and is free of anything else, is carrying a purpose that God has given him, and born into a specific demographic label which would precondition the predetermined factors of what it means to be black. He did not choose those conditions, he found them, and if he chooses to live in contradiction to those systems, he's ostracized. Because my culture, as a so-called black person, is like this. The community determines the society, the Western culture, society, the person, individual determines society, defines society, the individual. But in my community, society defines the individual. So they come from two different ends. So one culture, the individual defines society. One culture, society defines the individual. So for me to be an individual, I need the permission of other people. For me to be who I'm supposed to be, I need other people to consent to that. And people generally would give you the permission to be everything else except be yourself. People will never allow you to be yourself because then you become different. Then they say, who do you think you are? So, whoa, who do you think I am? I'm trying to be where I'm supposed to be. Is that a problem? You know, it seems to be a problem when you're trying to be yourself. When you want to be what God wants you to be, it seems to be a problem in South Africa. You have to conform. You have to be arrested by collectivist mindset. You have to belong somewhere. You have to come into a belief system where everybody else agrees with that. And so, I mean, I don't know why God would ask me then, a young person, to write a book on veneration of ancestors and on culture. And I asked God, you're doing Christian education. I wanted to find out from God, why didn't he ask me to write for my first book a nice topic or something light, like maybe 7 steps or 7 keys to success, or this kind of books. Something light, not something heavy like ancestors. So everywhere I've been going, I've been telling people, they're inviting me to talk about the culture and ancestors. I tell them, whoa, people, I know other things in the Bible also. I'm not a Ghostbusters for ancestors. I know the other things in the Bible. Everywhere I go, I get invited to speak on this subject. I say, whoa, I know other things in the Bible, please. I'm not a Ghostbusters of ancestors. And ancestors, obviously, they don't like me, as you can tell. There's no way they could like me. I mean, there's no way. Because, and they don't like anybody, as a matter of fact. They're always in a bad mood. Never in a good mood. I've never had ancestors in a good mood. They have mood problems. They've got emotional issues. Always. Every time you consult a witch doctor or traditional healer, the ancestors are angry. They're always angry. All the time. They're permanently angry. And so people live to placate them. They live to appease these angry spirits, these sadistic spirits who I believe are responsible for the high levels of violence in our continent. Spirits that, if you read the whole Bible, in fact, let me just share this to you. Now, the way that I teach, and you have to excuse me, I sometimes read my notes, sometimes I don't. But I'll end somewhere. This is how I do it. So we're different, you know what I mean? So some people do PowerPoint. I tried. It's not my culture. That didn't work. I keep looking. Everybody's looking this. I'm like, what's the next slide? I'm like, I get disturbed. So Deuteronomy chapter 18, verse 9 to verse 12. The patriarch Moses speaks to the nation of Israel. And now you know the story. Moses is told by God, there's Canaan, you won't enter there. So now he's giving his last rites. The whole book of Deuteronomy is about Moses repeating many things that have happened. He reminds them of their journeys. He says the 10 Commandments again. Then he warns them. So in Deuteronomy 18, verse 9, verse 12, it says, when you come into the land which the Lord your God has given you, the land of Canaan, you shall not land to follow the abominations of those nations. He's not talking about African nations at that time. He's not talking about any of our tribal whatever. And so he says, and then he begins to name those abominations. None of you shall make your son or daughter pass over the fire, or practices necromancy or divination. And it mentions 8 abominations and it says those who do these things have become an abomination. And because of these abominations, it drives the nations out from before. He talks about nations, 7 nations, the Hivites, the Jebusites, the Canaanites. He says he drives them, meaning he's giving you their land, not because you're special Israelites, but because he's punishing them for idolatry. And at that time, the land of Canaan was the epicenter of idolatry at that time in the world. They worshipped Baal, they worshipped demons, they practiced bestiality. The issue of passing your son or daughter over the fire was a worship of a goddess called Molech. Molech was a statue with burning fire on the inside, which they worship with putting a child in the hands of the Molech. And the child will burn slowly, and they'll beat drums to drown out the cry of the baby in the hands of Molech. That's how evil the Canaanites were. That's why you find a very strange instruction in the Bible where God tells the nation of Israel to obliterate the Canaanites from the earth. Not to leave anyone living, even nursing infants, because they could not be redeemed. They worship Baal. In fact, we believe the word cannibalism is a combination of Canaan and Baal, the eating of human flesh. That's how evil Canaanites were. So the Israel were told, remove them from the earth. And they did not remove them from the earth. As you know, Israelites keep intermarrying with various nations. And we believe they went out from there as Phoenicians and assumed a different name. And we believe that they came in different parts of the world, including Africa and also Europe. That's why astrology is part of those 8 abominations. People say, my star sign is Libra or Capricorn. Your star sign, what are you talking about? The future is not written somewhere in the back of a magazine. It's written in God's word. Stop pitching some back of a magazine somewhere for your prognosis. So people do that. And so these abominations that were there are used today in modern, in contemporary context with different words. But it's the same demons, but masquerading in different form. Because there's no new demons in the earth. Whenever we cast demons out today, they've been around the earth for ancients, for thousands of years. But these spirits of Canaan, I believe they're sadistic spirits. They're thousands of years, they're old. They know how human beings can be manipulated. And I believe they've been roaming around various parts of the world. They will use whatever people are predisposed to believe in. Okay, so the European culture is materialistic. Therefore, they'll use that to bound people. The African culture has belief. It's not immaterial. There's a belief system and it's collectivity. So they use that to bound people. When that culture, as you know, when it's redeemed from idolatry, I say when I explain it, I say that the weakness of European culture is superiority, and the weakness of Africa. So I would say people of European descent have to be conscious in addressing superiority, as people of African descent have to be conscious in addressing idolatry. So the weakness of African culture is idolatry. And so that's something we need to confront. So those demons know that. They know that some nations are more likely to do this because of their upbringing, socialization. I say culture is not nature but nature. It's not genetic but generational. It's not biologic but behavioral. In other words, there's no culture in my genes. But the people who believe that, strangely enough, I mean, if I have to eat right now food, as you would know, my body needs recommended daily allowance, my RDA, wellness nutrients. There's no black, the body doesn't know black, it just knows that if a deficiency of vitamin D, there's going to be a response. The body doesn't know if it's black or white. It just knows you need so much vitamin D, vitamin C. It's biologic. It's not racial. You don't eat vitamin C, you're going to suffer for it. Because that's just what the body requires. And it's available in every part. So it tells us, on my biology, there's no culture. So there's nothing that will happen to me physically if I don't do certain practices, as I was told growing up. If you don't do this, you'll never have children. And I do have children. If you don't do this, it's going to happen to you. So people believe these things and they remain bound by these things. And so it's time now, we as a church, we've been trying to do this before. We're trying to minister the gospel above culture and pretend as if this doesn't exist. But it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Because you have people not arrested, but I would say almost imprisoned in your church for 2 hours on a Sunday, but they're not arrested. But you have people on a Sunday for 2 hours, 2 hours on Sunday. We think you can change somebody on Sunday for 2 hours who stays the rest of the week elsewhere, influenced by something else. I mean, I thought myself, I've been a minister for, it's my 20th year. I've looked at the people I'm pastoring, I'm like, for 10 years, some of them, I've been preaching to them. I'm like, what is happening? You've been sitting here for 10 years, I've stood in this pulpit for 10 years preaching to you, and you're still the same person. What have I been doing? Like, I really poured my heart. But I realized that the gospel is not working. I don't know if you noticed this. Southern Africa, so-called Christian bloc, has the highest level of HIV incidence levels than Northern Africa, which is Islam. So I'm wondering if Christianity is working actually. If the Southern African bloc, which is Christian, has high levels of HIV/AIDS and poverty and dictators and more damage than Northern Africa, what's the problem with our morality? Are we relativists? Are we social ethics? Are we influenced by the world? So I sit and I look at my people, I'm thinking, guys, I've been preaching to you for 10 years. And I realized we had exactly been doing that. We've been preaching, but we've not been teaching. We've been discipled people. So we've got people who are converts, but not disciples. So Jesus in this country has many fans, but very few friends. Many people will kill for the land, very few will die for the Lord. Because we are anthropocentric, we are focusing on what we can get from the Lord, rather than what we can give to the Lord. Right now, if you want a successful church, you want to have a church that promises people things than inviting them to die. If you promise them things, what they will benefit from Jesus, they'll flock in your church. If you tell them, come and die, I'm not coming. Come and give your life to, imagine, the prayer we made, I don't know what prayer you made when you received Jesus, but I remember the prayer I made. The prayer I made was that, Jesus, I give you my life. I don't know what prayer you made, that's what I did. But guess what most of us did? We took me back. We said, I give you my life, take over, I give you. The next thing, as we left that church service, whatever evangelist was preaching, immediately we took our life back. I'm in charge here. I'll give it to you back on Sunday, otherwise, the rest of the week, I'm in charge. I'll keep giving it to you on Sunday, taking it on Monday, and I'll keep giving it to you on Sunday. We'll just play that game between you. That's why South Africa can be 70% Christian and yet be so dysfunctional. Because we have what I call Christian atheists. People who believe in God in an abstract mind, but not in the reality of the heart. So God exists in their minds, as and when it pleases them, when they think of Him, there somewhere in the sky, but not in reality in terms of living a daily life with an awareness of His presence and values that are defined by Him. As you would know, we don't vote for truth, make up truth, we discover truth. Truth is imposed to us from above. We don't have to agree with truth for truth to be truth. Truth is outside of us and it comes to us from God. So if we don't believe that God is who He is, then we can't live the values of God's kingdom. And so part of the things that happen here is this. You have young people in your schools, children are very innocent. They will take anything you teach them. And you tell them, Jesus loves you, this I know, for the Bible tells me so, sing it, it's wonderful. Until about four things would happen in a human being in this continent that sort of makes you wonder if you really, really made an impact in your discipleship program. When a child is born, culture is more pronounced in my country on 4 stages. When a child is born, when a person transitions from being a child to being an adult, whether manhood, a rite of passage, marriage, and death. In those 4 stages, you will tell who governs the person. How the funerals are conducted, the beliefs around death, a mourning period, grief, marriage, how women are treated, patriarchy, subservient role of women, what role they function, where they must sit, where they must speak, how children are treated. I grew up in a silent world, in a world of silence, where I only spoke when I'm asked the question. Nobody ever asked me, how are you? How do you feel? Because my voice did not matter. In fact, regarding ancestors and spirits, I grew up I was raised to fear everything else except God. I didn't know that God should be feared, but I knew other things should be feared. That was my world. My grandfather was a witch doctor. It's not a political correct term today, so we have to catch up with the term. So, traditional healer. Same with women who sell their bodies. No, don't use the word like prostitute. No, that's too gross. Sex workers. See, that's we getting into the times. Sex workers. It's a vocation. You see, as if somebody chooses that. Which is not the case. Somebody is forced into that by circumstances, which governments ought to address rather than legislate prostitution. Yeah, that's right. As if somebody would just choose, which career do you want to be? Prostitute. Come on, that's not true. Nobody makes that kind of choice. Yeah. They're forced into that. So we should address the issue that forces them into that, rather than making it all right and easy to get that space. But that's what happens when we govern by governments that are anti-Christian, that are humanistic in their worldview, and we're not present in that space. We are absent, we leave them to do their own thing. So I grew up in a world like that, and Jesus, so I was in line to follow, because these things are passed from one generation to the next. Had I been an obedient child, and stop this thing of being born again, had I been a submissive, pliant, complacent child, I was in line to receive a mantle, to throw bombs and hear things and be a medium. Because from grandfather and then to me, my father and to me, so I was in line for that. That's all I knew, something happening, something that's not cannot be explained. We must go and consult. We pay money, then we give it a prognosis or diagnosis. This was happening. Answers are not happy, never happy. So you must understand that. And so we then do this, and we do a chicken or goat, depending on what you can afford. And then if it doesn't work, you do something else. But they are always around. And they're watching you. And so ancestors, the Bible says that if the devil had known the power of God and the wisdom of God, he would not have crucified a lot of glory. So I do know the devil really is not omniscient. He doesn't know everything. Now I know that. Because how he allowed me to walk into a church service in a community where I stayed into a hall where somebody was doing an outreach. They came from Johannesburg to PE and they did an outreach. And we walked in out of curiosity. In fact, we went in to mock the service because we thought these spirit-filled people, this is crazy. They are paid to lie. Somebody said they were healed. No, they are paid. It's all staged up. So we're laughing about it every day. As kids from school, we talk about, don't forget, we're meeting tonight in the hall, the circus, like the guys are meeting there. And so to us, we're like, this is going to be fun tonight. We've got nothing else to do anyway. We might as well go to the circus and watch the clown, the preacher there, and the rest of his entourage. So we thought it was funny, and so I came here with my friends. I'm sitting there somewhere, and one thing they did, and I just believe they're so good. They should have done this, and God gave them wisdom. They brought a gospel group from Johannesburg called G Effect. They're quality, very talented vocally. And at that time, we were obsessed with American music, ballads and R&B, Boys to Men, Take Six, and all of that. So we love that. These guys are doing this thing live. Well, I can't believe it. I'm like, no, they can't be. This is real. We've never seen a PA system, first of all. Somebody playing instruments. Just everything is just for us like, wow. Wow, like he's that thing, he presses it and sound comes. Wow, this is amazing. And so it was excellent. So they pitched at a very high level. We were very impressed with that. And these guys could sing very well. I just couldn't understand the way. I thought it was what a waste of talent. Man, they could just make lots of money if they sing "Baby I Love You" or something that would be. What is this thing? These guys are close. He's singing to Jesus. I don't know. He's so committed. I'm like, what a waste of. I mean, imagine how much money he would make. You just sing "Baby I Love You," whatever. Just something with romance. We'll buy it, not this other person I don't see, and he's crying with tears. I watched this guy, this guy called Israel Masasha, singing. He had tears in his eyes, singing to this person I don't see. But he was so captivated, so captured. So I looked at this, and I love music. And the next thing, the preacher comes in, he preaches, and then he makes what I know now to be an altar call. Then my friends are like, what's going on now? That's not part of the script. What's going on? My hand is going up. That's not what we came here for. When my hand is going up, they're like, whoa, what's going on? Like, because we're drinking buddies. They're like, they're going to miss out on minus one drinking buddy here. And the next thing that I was on a Wednesday, by Friday I was in the church choir. That's how good they were. Those guys were so good. Some of you who know this, young people's music, you may know somebody called Loiso Bala. He was in our church, and Zohai, his brother, from Drakensberg Boys Choir. They were trained here at Drakensberg. At this part, and they sing. They are known gospel music. They were there. So we want to be, all we want to be around these talented musicians. We can't sing. We just want to be there. There's a choir, I want to be in the choir. I don't know what key I'm supposed to sing, but as long as I'm around these guys who know something about music, and they look like they're from somewhere, they speak this Zulu accent. So they are from, I don't know, they're Xhosa, so they're like, everything is just nice. They've got cell phones. Cell phones in the 90s, like something is ringing, you pick it and you answer it. I'm like, it's all fascinating. It's like, the phone, no wire, no cord. And so this guy's saying, and I was captured. But one thing that made it work for me for the last 20 years is how the youth ministry was structured. Talking about children. The youth ministry was structured so well, it captured my heart so strongly. But the discipleship and the follow-up system was so effective. The young people were not relegated to the back of the church as some nuisance, as some waste of time, as the adults are busy with the real stuff. They were attended to, the real church, and it captured me for the last 22 years. And I was lost from the world. And I've been in ministry for the last 20 years, as I said. So we need to change the way we look at young people. Because if somebody had not done what he did at that time 22 years ago, the person who's writing books over there would not exist, at least for the Lord. And I've buried many of my friends, the cool guys, the cool kids, the ones who everybody thought they were cool. They're under 6 feet under, I've buried them. Every time I come around, I'm like, this guy was popular. And I've traveled, I come back from Kenya, I come back from Ethiopia, I'm like, this guy is still there. And I come back and I go to Stockholm and I come back, I'm like, this guy has not moved. He's been in the same place for the last 6 years. I've moved around a lot. He's stuck, he's planted forever. He's beautiful but dead. He's handsome but dead. What a waste. And what causes us not to penetrate or have effect in preaching the gospel in this continent is this thing called culture. Because here, you will find people say they're Christians. Everybody in South Africa is a Christian, I don't know if you know, but everybody here is a Christian because we tick the box. Because we're not saying, we're just not, I'm not a Muslim, so what's the other alternative? Okay, Christian, because I went there 20 years ago when I was born, and I was christened. It makes sense, it's popular. But there's very few real Christians in this country. People who fear God. And part of the reason is because while they say 70% of South Africans are Christians, also 70% involved in consulting traditional healers. If you ask me, who's behind the crime in South Africa? Christians. Who else? It's 7 out of 10 are Christians. Christians are involved in crime. Christians are involved in crime. I know it because when I was at university, we were doing the mediation during the Fees Must Fall protest. When it was there, Christians were part of the people who were on both sides of the protest, looting, burning, destructing things, destroying things, and they felt justified doing so. In fact, somebody read me John chapter 2, when Jesus came into the temple with a symbol. So unfortunately, I had the wisdom to read the scripture before I addressed them. So I get to know that it's being used as a proof text to show Jesus as somebody who engaged in premeditated violence, that he made the whip. John says that, by the way. But other synoptic gospels don't mention the whip. Only John does. And I said, of course, he made the whip because John says he made the whip. One verse in the Bible says he made the whip. It's so, it's true. He drove them off, right? He drove them off. But it doesn't say he drove them off with a whip. You're inferring that in the text. There were also animals in the temple. And generally, when we drive animals, we drive them up with a whip. So there's nothing in the Bible that talks about a whip connecting with human flesh. You infer that because it reads better for you, for what you want to do. But it drove them off. And the word drove them off is the same word the Holy Spirit drove Jesus into the wilderness to be tempted. The same word driving out demons. So it means strength, a strong, emphatic word, but not necessarily violent or physical. So it drove them off. And so I said, but in two instances where Jesus would have justified rationalized violence, a woman caught up in adultery, he says, the rabbi in that picture, only one who can sanction the sentence. He doesn't sanction the sentence, he forgives her. But who has no sin doesn't cast the first stone. And so in that instance, violence was justified, and he doesn't engage in it. And secondly, when he came to arrest him and Peter cut off the ear, he restores it. So two instances where violence was more justified, he didn't engage in it. And you tell me in an instance where it's obscure, it's not even clear that he did it, you will tell me based on this one verse, you project this person to be a person who's violent. And I realized that, wow, a lot of people don't really know Jesus. You know, I felt lately that we need to preach Jesus to Christians. Yeah. Yes. I feel we must introduce Jesus to Christians because they don't know him. They know about him, but they don't know him. Because if they know him, who he is, and what he stands for, there will not be racism in South Africa. I mean, was it Mahatma Gandhi who said, I like you, Jesus, but I have a problem with these Christians? When they came to preach to him, trying to convert him to Christianity, he says, I have no problem with your Christ, I have a problem with Christians, because they are so unlike your Christ. I mean, we must be honest and face the fact here. We have misrepresented Jesus. We have failed Jesus. We have failed his mission. We have used his ministry to advance our own purposes. Jesus is nice for us for what we get from him. Yet, in reality, we should know that this person changed the world. And he came to seek and save the lost. He did not come to give us ministry. He came to die. And so we don't worship him even because he makes life better. We worship him because he's better than life. But there's no other one to worship. And so I won't talk about cultural practices because we don't have time. But here's the thing. Every practice that is done in the name of culture is based on the fact that a person sees culture as a source of identity. When a woman and a man who are in love cannot marry because they can't afford to marry because of the payment they must make, but they can afford to fornicate, it tells me that people would rather fear man than to fear God. If they have no problems doing fat and set and fornicating and making babies, that means they don't have a problem with fearing God. They can just not fear God. They just fear man. That means those people are imprisoned by culture. Because God should always come first, not human beings. And so, we then, if we go to a church service, and I go to a multi-racial church, and people boast that my church is multi-racial. I say, oh, that's wonderful, that's great. Mine is not. I mean, we're in a deep township, so we're not multi-racial, except for one colored guy. So that makes us biracial. So we are there, and I go to multiracial churches, and I realize, no, multiracial churches in South Africa are not multicultural. And there's a big difference. Multiracial, multicultural is not the same thing. Multiracialism is like sitting in a bus, where we're sitting in the same bus, but we're going to a different destination. We don't know each other, and we don't care to know each other, but we just happen to be in the same bus. That's multiracial. Multicultural is when we share destination, life experience, conversations, and our stories. That's when a church leadership is representing of the people in the pews, not only one race. Yeah. Because that's what I see as multiracial churches in South Africa. How is this multiracial? I'm like, just tell me your leadership. Show me your leadership. I said, no, okay, it is multiracial, but it practices cultural fascism. It believes in a cultural hierarchy. The dominant culture is in leadership. The dominated culture is sitting on the pews, giving offerings and supporting the ministry. The leaders are one race, the followers are one race. That's most churches in South Africa. The first time I preached to a so-called white church was in Europe. When I told them, they said, what do you mean? You seem to know the Bible. I said, yeah, you think I know the Bible. My people there don't think so. Not in my country. In my country, it's white people who teach black people, not the other way around. It's like it's set in stone. I said, no, not in my church, not in my South Africa. South Africa, no white person wants me to preach to them. They can preach to me, of course. I'm the mission field. I said, really? I said, yeah, I'm not South Africa, we're crazy. I have to prove myself that I actually know the Bible. I have to work twice to prove myself. You know, I went to well-meaning lady in Portsmouth, in Summerstrand, you know the place called Summerstrand, it's a beach area, very beautiful houses. So I'm visiting this friend, and she says to me, you know, come and watch the time that The Passion of the Christ came out, Mel Gibson movie. Come and watch The Passion of Christ. You need to see what they've done to Christ and go and tell your people. So I had to sit there for 3 hours, watching The Passion to see what they did to Jesus so that I can go and tell my people. I was so shocked. I'm like, okay, yes, Janet. Okay, Janet. I'm watching what they did to Jesus and I go and tell my people. And so, and we can't really, I mean, they took a trip one day, this friend of mine, to, I think, Botswana, Bundu bashing with the 4x4s. And, you know, when you can, you know, when you can, and just travel through Africa. And they went there, and they came back with stories. One of the stories that, you know, we were traveling in this village, and we kept giving a lift to some people who were hiking, your people. So we're sitting here, we're in a business meeting with other leaders. She says it twice, your people. So I don't know where to hire, I don't know what's going on. I'm like, you gave a lift to your people. I mean, in Botswana, they are my people. There, I've not been there, I don't know yet. But that time I get to know that they are my people in Botswana. You gave a lift to my people. I'm like, sure. How can I mean, sometimes it's shocking. Let me tell you something about racial superiority. Not only is it hurtful, of course, I mean, I'm not going to dwell on that. It is extremely hurtful. But sometimes it's embarrassing. So people say to me, my friends say to me, guys in the township, pastors, they say to me, I don't have time for this. Why don't you tell them? You must tell them. I said, no, why don't you soften these people? I said, guys, we are called to love each other. Yeah, but tell us, no. At the end of the day, you don't have a right to correct a person you have not loved. Love is the foundation that gives you the right to speak into a person's life. You earn the right to speak to a person after you've loved them. The commandment is to love, not correct each other. When you love a person, then you earn the right to correct them. So these people I'm talking about, I've had to be closer to them. In the midst of that, I had to still go into their homes. Even though I knew that I come as a needy person in appearance. So I come, I'm like, and my friends just can't believe I'm doing this all the time. I'm like, you're still going there? I said, yes. Why? I said, we have to build relationships. I go there, go in this house and try and make me things and try and feed me. You know, come take some more. There's a scone, take some muffin, take some more. You want to take some home? I'm like, no, I don't have, but take. No. So we live with that, really. Honestly, it's shocking. So for me, I'm like, what can I do with this lady? She's missed it. She's living. And I know now for a fact that there's a generation in the book of Egypt, in the world that traveled into Egypt, in the book of Exodus, that had to die in the wilderness for 40 years. God could not allow them to come in. They had to die. So I knew that as South Africa, the people who must die for us to move forward. They will mess up the promised land. We must move around 40 years for them to die. Otherwise, they mustn't go. You can't help them. You can't redeem them. They are finished. They are factory faults. It was like you can't help them now. You must just pray I pray for you. You know, it's like. So we live in that space, but God is redeeming us because He wants to do His work. And I want to come to a close. God is faithful to us. Both the victim and the perpetrator need healing. There is no healing that is one-sided. Everybody's hurt. And I'm listening to the Vice Chancellor of the UCT talking about the death of Professor Mayos. This man sat in my session for UCT when I was there, invited by every nation. He came to my session and he was asking questions and engaging. So the last time I saw him was in my session, because I had staff meeting with university staff, and he was there, and now I hear that he took his own life. And so the professor spoke about, on radio, Cape Talk, spoke about that everyone is hurting at UCT, from every side. The fact that they've resolved the fees must fall does not take away the fact that they've hurt each other deeply during that time. There's people who are injured, because of that period of time. Because people, when they deal with contestations, their levels of anger and it gets very elevated, and they say things to each other that they should not be saying. And he reminded the students who are now sort of rising up to celebrate Professor Mayosi and standing up. He reminds them, and embarrassingly so, they don't want him to say it. They don't want him to say these things publicly. That you used to call him coconut and a white apologetic. You called him that when he was alive. No, I said, no, you did. When he disagreed with you, you called him a coconut. Now you're coming publicly as the first one to celebrate his legacy and things like that. And she spoke about the truth that we are all hurting at UCT. He says, the Vice Chancellor of UCT says, I carry anxiety pills in my bag to use them as and when I need to use them. The VC, he says, staff, lecturer, academic staff, some of them are suicidal, some of them are using drugs, some of them have divorced, some of them are using alcohol. He says it became chaotic with academic staff. They can't function. I'm listening to this woman speaking, I'm thinking, why is the solution? She talks about, they said they're doing a TRC at UCT. And no, the only solution is the church. Because they'll come to the TRC with no intention of finding true healing, but with the intention of accusing each other. Without intention of humility and finding solutions just to prove who's right, who's wrong. There will never be a TRC process until the church is in the middle of it. Because we are given, the ministry of reconciliation is given to us, nobody else. We have the ministry of reconciliation. Blessed are the peacemakers. We are peacemakers. You can't have peace without us. But the question is, are we at peace? To be peacemakers, are we at peace? Or are we at conflict as well within our hearts? And so I want us to think about what we can do, but I want to stop there because of time.
I think we're dealing with some very real issues this evening. And I know you've had a busy day. Okay, but maybe you've got a question that you're saying, I understand that, Pastor Afrika, but you don't understand. There's this situation, there's that situation. And I think we're family. And if we're going to be the example that transforms this nation, and we're going to be the ones influencing the next generation, we're going to have it right here. So he said to me before we started, he said, do you mind if we do questions and answers? He says, I said, well, what type of questions would people ask? And he said, we're dealing with this type of situation. What do you think we should do? That's the type of question. Because I think we're skirting politely around one another and saying the love you brother, love you sister, as long as you don't come too close. And we've got to try and get along with one another, but we can't, you see, when we're in front of the next generation, they see right through that. And they're the ones that we're raising up to be the presidents and the politicians and the business leaders of the future. So, does anybody have a question?
Thank you so much, Pastor. I come from Kenya, and I'm sure you have heard our stories. Ours is not racial, it's ethnicity. Every cycle of election, some churches, even Bible studies, can't take place because we side with the politicians from our tribes. If you had a chance to speak to the church in Kenya, what would be your advice?
Samora Michel, former president of Mozambique, once said, "For a nation to live, the tribe must die." For the nation to live, the tribe must die. You would never have patriotism as long as you have tribalism. So if you want to promote tribalism, you must kill, or patriotism, you must kill tribalism. So there's always a contrastation between patriotism and ethnocentricity. These two are always at war. So one has to promote nationhood. It's not only Kenya. The continent of Africa has 3,000 tribes. We speak of 8,000 dialects. We're the most ethnically diverse place on earth. We've been told diversity is a strength, but we're seeing more of it as a weakness. Because we have not learned to live with each other. They did the same thing in Rwanda, where they killed 800,000 people in 100 days because of that. And so, unfortunately, not only the church leadership, but we don't have, in African continent, there are very few countries who have true statesmen, unifiers, fathers of nations, those who rise above tribalism, who don't come into power via a tribal ticket, but because they've won the hearts of other people. That requires a different level of leadership, where a person is in the position to serve the people, not to be served. And that kind of positional leadership needs to be confronted in Africa. We got the syndrome of big men, small people. So everyone wants to be a big man because it benefits them, and everybody else is a small person there. And so it's going to be a challenge. In South Africa, we've got another one here between Zulus and Xhosas. It may not be violent as it happens in Kenya, but there's always a preference. When the president is Zulu, he brings in Zulus into cabinet. In Xhosa, the same thing. So we don't always have the best people serving the country. We only have people from a certain tribe. So the best talent is left behind because it's from the wrong tribe. So the prosperity of Africa is when we identify the continent as one. We are Africans first and Xhosa second. That not only tribalism, but even the colonial borders that we have set, which we now do everything around these borders that are man-made, that are superficial, where even this country suffers by high levels of xenophobia because of the same things. So until we have what Thabo Mbeki was trying to do when he was in power, this thing of African Renaissance, a unifying voice in Africa, and a unifying presidents who rise above tribal things, we will not pass this. Because every tribe, if they know that when their president is in power, they will eat, it will be their turn to eat, then they will make sure that our man is in power so we may eat. If people stop building their villages when they're in power, they build a country, then nobody will bother to vote for a person because they would know that he won't necessarily prioritize their village because it's from here. He will look at the country from the treasury and from the central government situation. So until we have people who stop building their villages when they come to power, they look at the priorities of a country and they use pragmatic systems to govern the country rather than emotional, untested, unscientific methods. So we should pray for more of those leaders. We had them. We had Julius Nyerere. We had leaders like that in the continent. People who spoke about Africa, not Tanzania. And we had, those voices are now gone, of course, but we must pray for them. We had Mandela here. Last time we had a president who really unified us. And everybody else has made a point of dividing us.
Pastor, my name is Tolan Machola. First of all, thank you. Thank you for the most wonderful, honest message that you've shared with us this evening. Very, very, very honest, upfront, straight to the point. And there's a lot of learning which is happening to most of us. Now, out of curiosity, I know you warned us not to speak about race. So I will follow on your footsteps and say there are human beings. There are some human beings who are more dominant than other human beings. So how about those who are not as dominant as the dominant ones in the Christian environment coexist and create a much better opportunity for us in the Christian faith to actually come closer together as human beings? And then secondly, South Africa is 70% Christian, as you said. And yet it would appear that in terms of our government, there is very little appreciation for the 70% of us who are Christian, which is not reflected in their curriculum system. So how can we, as Christians, then tackle this issue? Thank you.
Okay, so I will use the terms that you're avoiding to use, and I'll liberate you. And so, black and white people in South Africa can coexist as long as they stop protecting blackness and whiteness. Our inheritance, our main inheritance, is not this country, but is the kingdom of God. This country is a secondary inheritance. And in this country, we are only stewarding it on God's behalf, not on behalf of our children. As long as we keep some part of the country for perpetuity, for speculative reasons, to pass on to my children, not to advance God's kingdom, I'll therefore protect those who look like me, because I'm investing in their success rather than the prosperity of the God's kingdom of God. So until we are redeemed from being carnal and worldly and being self-focused, because most of the contestation in South Africa is around material resource. We agree on spiritual principles. We just fight on them. That means we're materialistic rather than spiritual. That's why Paul says, henceforth, that was many years ago, by the way, henceforth, we know no man after the flesh, but after the spirit. So we need to come into a place of, therefore, obliterating the importance of material resource as a standard of whatever. The success must be defined as obedience to the call of God for our lives, rather than achieving anything that the world will celebrate. And therefore, people talk to me about language, and I've met people who speak a vernacular language. I've met Sotho farmers who speak Sotho and Tswana, and other people who think it's too much work. And I say, it wouldn't be too much work if you were missional in your mind. Not going to mission, but being missional. Constantly thinking missions in your mind. Living your life as a missionary on a day-to-day basis. You would learn the language of the people if you saw their souls as valuable. So it's a matter of values, what we value the most. And so, therefore, we will change even worship in church if it means we reach more people. But we're not prepared to do that at the expense of losing people, because we'd rather be comfortable. Do what we like, even though it's not getting us more people to come to church. So for that, we'll answer to Christ. Christ never told us to have a band. I am not against the band. He told us to worship in spirit and truth. If the band obscures us from worshiping God in spirit and truth, the band must sit down. Because we have not come to worship instruments, we've come to worship God. And in the African continent, we don't mind if they're instruments or not. I was in a service, rather, at a Mighty Man conference, for the priest of Mighty Man. Massive, you know Mighty Man, massive. Angus is late, Angus, an hour late. And so we gathered in this farm, big sound. I mean, we built stages out of nowhere. And all that sound systems to rival any sounds with screens. But then we dismissed the service. I'm not in charge. We dismissed the service for people to mingle around and while we were waiting for Omangas to arrive. I thought to myself, wow, we won't do that in the township. Of course not. Because the band practiced 4 songs doesn't mean anything. We tell the band, continue singing. That's not our set. The set is 4 songs. What do you mean about set? Don't you know other songs to sing? We will not waste the resource of a full instrumentation in the middle of nowhere where people are going nowhere, who are captive audience, and dismiss them because we're waiting for one person. Not in the township. We'll be on the floors singing. In fact, a mama on the back will start a song. If the band guy thinks that it's too much work for him. Mama, please, let the guy step down. Give us a song. Because we don't have this whole thing of structure, time, the key of being, ding, no. It's the way the notes. There's no notes, we can't sing. What do you mean? Sing with your voice. It's complicated. So we're struggling to merge the two because it gets very difficult sometimes. But we can, because I mean, most of you are operating in cross-cultural, so you know how to navigate that. So we can. And so in Parliament, particularly, the reason why the Parliament remains what it is because Christians, when they vote, they're majority most. They vote their stomachs, not their values.
Yeah.
Yes. So the government here, we can dethrone the government here next election. If we stop voting for our needs, we vote our values. So the next election, they could be over because we're the majority here. But we give them, we're a voting folder. We give them our votes in exchange for fixing a pothole.
Yeah.
Even if they kill the children, the babies in the womb, we don't mind that, as long as they fix my pothole.
Yeah.
Because we've got wrong values. Our priorities are confused. How can you vote for somebody who's fixing a pothole while he's killing babies in the womb?
Hey.
Firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to attend this conference. I really appreciate it, Pastor Graham. And Pastor Afrika, thank you for what you've shared. My name is Hannah, and I'm privileged or blessed enough to be one of the pastors in a truly multicultural church. And so what I want to ask is, for church and school, how do we, how do we proactively protect and propagate embracing multicultural in our South African context?
Okay. So we wouldn't need to be intentionally pursuing multiculturalism because that mixed pot sometimes cannot be mixed properly.
Yeah.
If we just forgot who we are for a second, we won't even know that we have mixed it correctly.
That's right.
Because if, I would say this, if revival were to break out here now, I'm talking about real presence of God, no one will be aware what car they're driving, what they're eating tonight. We are more aware of ourselves the further we are from God. The closer we are to God, the less aware of ourselves. So it's an issue of proximity. When Adam and Eve ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, they said to God, we hid from you because we saw that we were naked. And then God asked them a question, who told you are naked? He didn't deny or confirm the supposed nakedness. He simply checked who's the source of your information, who validates you, where do you get that from? So the same thing God could say to us, who told you you're white? Who told you you're black? Where do we get that from? So we are more aware of the fact that we are left behind as a person. Like if I come into a meeting, I become aware that I'm different in relation to how other people posture themselves as being important. If there was less posturing of whiteness in a conference I attend to, there would be less awareness of blackness. So if I walk in a meeting and people only speak Afrikaans, I'm aware that I'm not African speaking. Because they've made me the other. It's a separation line. I mean, I don't speak Afrikaans, but I preach among Afrikaners. I expect them to be aware of the fact that I'm in their meeting. And so they have to be conscious of the fact that if I can come and speak with my friends closer only and they come to a service, it will also be isolating. So we need, therefore, as much as we value, we love our languages, we should love humanity more than we love our things. Amen. So the value of human beings should be high in our lives and the value of the things we love, which will be left behind on earth anyway and be burned with fire. So at the expense, therefore, if the more we come closer to God, I mean, Paul says, I become all things to all people, that I may win some. So the day we decide, that is why even my cross-cultural ministry is intentional. It started before an accident. Like I'm invited, I'm like, oh, preaching for people. My guys asked me, how do you do it? I said, I don't know, they just invited me. So it started an accident. I was stumbling over, having butterflies in my stomach. I'm not sure if somebody would hear me understand. Until I realized, no, this is not an achievement. I'll be honest with you, it felt like an achievement before to preach to 40,000 men at the Mighty Men Conference. Until I realized, no, it's a calling. If you don't do it, Paul says, woe unto me if I don't preach the gospel. It's an obligation and a calling. You are more obligated to do this than you are choosing. It's not an opt-in or opt-out. You have to be a peacemaker. It's not your choice. It's made for you. Therefore, you have to go to an 80% white meeting, even if you don't feel like it, because that's where you deserve and need to be. By sitting in a VIP section with 40 people, I'm the only black person, I'm the only person of color who's worthy enough to be VIP. But I sit there, and I'm thinking to myself, why am I here? I'm like, because God wants you here. But my emotions don't want me there. But I don't listen to my emotions. Because if I did, I would not follow Christ. If I walked how I feel, I wouldn't have driven 4 hours to come to Drakensberg.